Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
Hi, I'm Paul Newton.
Hi, I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
On Ask the A&Ps, we take your toughest maintenance questions, and we do our best to answer them. So if you have a question, and we really hope you do, because this show wouldn't work without that, please send your questions to podcasts at aopa.org, and we'll try to schedule you to get on the show.
And if you have as much fun listening to the podcast as we do producing the podcast, be sure and subscribe and follow us wherever you listen.
They couldn't possibly have as much fun as we
No,
do.
that's true. That's probably true.
It's illegal.
It's illegal.
And if, by the way, and if you'd like to get on our email list for our monthly newsletter and other good stuff, the easiest way to do that is to pick up your smartphone and text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777, which is not a prime number. I don't know. But text the word SAVVY to 33777, and a little email bot will pop up and ask you for your name and email address and put you on our mailing list. Again, text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777 to put yourself on our list.
So, Mike, we have and Colleen, we have a lot of big news in the maintenance world with clamps.
Bad news.
Bad news. Bad news.
Yeah.
You have a turbo, at least. Is it just turbos or?
Yeah. Well, I assume. I don't know of any non-turbos.
No, it's specifically multi-segment V-band clamps with what the AD calls V-band couplings, that connect the tailpipe to the turbocharger. And the FAA issued an AD affecting literally every turbocharged engine in the universe that has multi-segment coupling, which is most of the turbocharged engines. And the problem is that, and they life limited the clamps, and they said, 500 hours, and you have to replace them. And if you don't have a record of how old yours is, you have to assume it's more than 500 hours. You have to replace it. And the problem is there aren't any clamps. The supply instantly dried up, probably dried up when the NPRM came out. I doubt it even waited for the AD. And I checked yesterday. Somebody was in South Africa was desperately looking for a clamp. And the best delivery I could find was next April.
So what do you think you could get for some of these suckers if you've got a stash?
Billions.
Probably 10 times the normal selling price. People are desperate.
My erstwhile husband has a box of these that he's not,
Wait. Your what husband?
Erstwhile, yeah.
Erstwhile. Man, I love this podcast. I learned so many new words.
Dangerous. Yeah, he's got a bunch of these, and I'm thinking we could take a vacation this winter, maybe
easily
fund a trip to Antarctica or something like that.
Well, if he has
Antarctica,
it's cold.
If he has any decency in him at all, he will send at least one of them to South Africa for this
right.
He'll make
guy who is desperate.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask. I mean, the classic question is, could you monitor the condition of these, or is it something you can't see until it goes real fast?
No, there's some allowance for inspecting and continuing an operation initially, but still, most of them, as Mike said, you don't know how long they've been on there. They were installed with the engine.
But how do they fail is what I'm asking.
They crack.
But is it like one day it's fine and the next day it's done?
No, it takes a while. And this is nothing new. We've had V-band clamp ADs and concerns for decades.
But could they have written the AD differently to keep them in service longer, as long as you monitor every 10 hours or 20 hours or whatever? Or do you think that's not reasonable?
Well, the thing is, this problem with these multi-segment clamps has been known for decades. This is not new. And it has always seemed to me, and I've run into this problem many times before with ADs over the decades that I've followed stuff like this, that the FAA is not really good at thinking about the logistics when they put an AD in place as to whether the parts are going to be available or whether they're going to be putting a bunch of the fleet on the ground because they can't get the parts that the AD requires them to get. And there's really two things that have always bugged me about the AD process as it is currently constituted. One is that the FAA doesn't really have an obligation to assess the risk involved in the accomplishment instructions to see whether the cure is worse than the disease, which in my view it sometimes is. And the second is that they don't really have an obligation to make sure that what they are mandating is possible to do.
It's a systems engineering approach, a whole systems approach that they're not taking. They're saying safety first, everything else is second. And I mean, it's like what's the term? Cutting off your nose to spite your face. I mean, it doesn't make sense to do that.
Yeah.
And you should consider the entire consequence.
Well, some of their thinking is definitely behind the times, and this isn't FAA bashing, but well, it sort of is, but they're so far behind the times in other aspects as well. Like the $85 an hour is their standard. This is what it costs to get something done. Yeah. And so an AD just came out on the Epic. It's a turboprop. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine any shop that's willing to work on that airplane that's charging less than $140, $150 an hour. Yeah. So there's just a lot about their process that needs to be updated.
There's probably some guy in West Texas operating off the back of his pickup truck that could do it for 85, but those days are long gone. I don't have any clue where the 85 came from, but you're right. I mean, some of their processes are just not thinking ahead. So you can be safe by not flying at all, which is, I think, where they end up. It's like, well, we're not worried about whether you accomplish your goal of getting from A to B as much as we are that no accidents occur.
Yeah. Well, that makes their job easier.
Sure.
I guess. But I mean, but it's a liability thing, right? If there's an accident and they could have prevented it, somebody's going to come out of the woodwork, and you can't sue the FAA, but they're going to, raise hell about
that. Part of the problem, I think, also is that frequently the FAA will issue an NPRM for an AD, and industry won't mobilize in opposition to it, or opposition may be the wrong word, but at least to challenge the proposal and try to convince the FAA to change it in a way that's more feasible. We ran into that problem with the twin Cessna exhaust AD back in 2000 when I was involved, and the FAA proposed an AD. It was a terrible problem. People were dying in these airplanes. Something had to be done. Nobody argued that an AD wasn't necessary. But the FAA had proposed an AD that literally would put most of the fleet on the ground for an indeterminate length of time. And we fought that tooth and nail. And I was right in the middle of the battle. And we managed to convince the FAA to change the AD in a number of ways that would allow it to be accomplished without grounding a lot of the fleet. And the AD was amazingly successful. We went from very frequent fatal accidents due to exhaust failure problems to zero as a result of the AD. So it was very successful. But if the FAA had done it the way they originally proposed to do it, whole bunch of those airplanes would have turned into paperweights. And so it's really our obligation as users and as an industry to band together and to raise hell when ADs like this are proposed. And it appears that not nearly enough hell was raised over these V-band clamps. The other thing that bothers me about this whole V-band clamp thing is, multi-segment V-band clamps are terrible. They have a long history of cracking.
Yeah.
And you got to take exhaust system failures in turbocharged engines super seriously, because
definitely,
like I said, people die, fall out of the sky. An in-flight fire is every pilot's worst nightmare. So we don't want to play around with this stuff. But there are single segment V-band clamps that don't have the problem.
Yeah.
Fortunately, my airplane has all single segment clamps and doesn't have any of these horrible multi-segment clamps. And yet the AD doesn't provide any basis for substituting single segment clamps for multi-segment clamps. If the airplane was originally certified with a multi-segment clamp, unless somebody secures an STC, which is a process that typically takes years, you've got to replace it with the same bad clamp, and then throw it away every 500 hours. And the clamps are expensive. It's just not a good solution.
You would think the motivation would be in the industry to improve the product, not have to be prodded by the FAA to do it in a catastrophic.
Yeah, it's interesting. When at AirVenture, I stopped by the GAMI booth.
They're working on it.
And I know George showed me some prototypes of some beautiful single piece clamps that he was working on getting STC'd. But that's the last I've heard about them. Yeah. And everybody's desperate for clamps. And I assume this is like in normal STCs that they take forever to get. So this is not going to be a solution for the short-term problem where the supply chain is just out of these things.
The first question is from Brendan, who is looking out for a friend. Go ahead, Brendan.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Love the show. And so this question is actually about my friend's plane, which I've spent a fair bit of time flying. My fiance has almost the identical plane and motor, so I know a fair bit about them, and reach out to you guys because I've listened to almost every single one of your podcasts, and have been trying to help my friend with diagnosing this problem. So it's a 1946 Taylorcraft BC-12D with a C85 that has the 0200 crank, rods, and pistons STC. No electric, you just hand prop the thing and usually fires right up. But a while back, it started to have faint, intermittent problems of basically the RPM dropping in flight, barely noticeable. But then several months ago, just after takeoff at only a couple hundred feet, it completely lost power momentarily. Talked to the mechanics. They thought it was carb ice, which is not uncommon on these motors, especially in Alaska. Then it happened again. Brought it back into the mechanics, blamed carb ice again, but eventually got the problem to happen on the ground with the mechanics witnessing it. So, I guess we'll watch the video, but it sounds pretty bad, like someone's pulling the mixture momentarily or shutting off the mags momentarily.
It's amazing when the mechanic is caring for stuff and how they feel about it. Oh.
Yep.
Yeah. That's
attention getting.
That's attention getting. So, Brendan, when I heard it just kind of cut out in the beginning, but later it seemed like a second event and the RPM was dropping and then the throttle was brought in to bring it back to life. Am I hearing that correctly, or were they actually pulling the throttle back?
No, that's correct. And I think you can hear it best at the beginning there, where it just completely cuts out, momentarily and then comes back on.
And this engine has just standard 2 magnetos, nothing interesting in the ignition system?
Nothing interesting. And then, so here's the list of what I got from the mechanics via text message, everything they did. They had both mags rebuilt, which they said were internally timed wrong from the factory. Tried a different set of mags, Bendix instead of Slicks, with the different wiring harness. Had all cylinders I ran for valve clearance and new guides from sticky valve wear. Reset all drive valve flash and gap on all cylinders. Bypassed all fuel screens to ensure good fuel flow to the carb. Tried 3 different carbs, one off a neighbor's Taylorcraft that was known to work well, and checked all spark plugs, which seemed to make good spark. No luck. And then the mechanic reported that, and then today one of the mags quit entirely, which brought me back to those, but we tried another set last week. And
holy smokes.
Yeah. Well, now the mechanic's out of ideas. We discussed it with some other mechanics who didn't have any aha moments. So wondering if you guys have any thoughts or ideas.
First off, it doesn't seem like a spark issue because you'd have to have 2 mags fail at the same time, which is why I was asking if you had some sort of special thing. You guys in Alaska and gals have a reputation for doing some wild things, which is, I was suspect right from the beginning when it's like you're asking for a friend, wink, wink kind of thing. But so anyway.
I had the same reaction, Paul. In aviation, when somebody says, I have a friend with a problem, you just know that this is a.
Yeah. So we're going to give you this one, but ignition, that doesn't even seem plausible.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even started my troubleshooting with ignition, but the carburetor and fuel/air supply seems perfectly plausible. Air supply.
If they hadn't replaced the carburetor twice, I would say it's a sticky float, but since they replaced the carburetor several times, I think that rules that out. I mean, I saw 2 obvious problems when I was looking at that video. One was those chocks are so way too small for those tires. I mean, that's a joke. I sure as hell wouldn't want to be standing in front of that airplane while that thing is running. And the second thing is that engine was at an angle. I don't know if you're supposed to run engines at an angle like that, are you?
With the nose pitch stuff.
Tail dragger, yeah. Mike. It's called a tail dragger. That's okay.
With some extra angle on the tires.
So, with the change of the carburetor, I would assume that the airflow into the carburetor was checked. There's no shop rags or anything in there. You're kind of left with fuel supply.
Which the mechanics bypassed everything. But bypassed all the fuel system and went directly to the carb. So
how did they bypass the fuel system and go to the carb? Like in a separate tank with the fuel line going to it?
I believe so.
Wow.
That's pretty extreme.
That is extreme.
This problem has been going on for months now, trying to figure out. And it is actually a friend's airplane. I just brought it to you guys because I'm the nerd here. But anyway.
So can I throw out, when I bought my Skybolt and flew it away from Tennessee, it was flying perfectly for 2 hours. And then all of a sudden it started missing. And this was in the air. It was very exciting. Plugs. Yeah. And when I taxied in, I did a mag check and it was a mess. And the mechanic who I love, he's since passed away, he recommended, let's check the spark plugs first. They're the cheapest thing on the engine before we start, taking things apart. And they didn't just look at them. When I took them out, the electrodes were beautiful. And I said, that's not the problem. I was so frustrated because they seemed to make a great spark. But when he put them in the bomb tester, where it pressurizes them and checks the spark, they all failed under that. And he said, somebody sold you an airplane and they had dropped all the spark plugs, which I don't know if that's true. I don't want to say that. The owner is a friend, but the thing is, I mean, when you say the plugs seem to make a good spark, were they checked in a machine, and did they check the resistance? Because for me, that was causing that problem. On the same note, I also had an issue in my Cardinal with skipping or missing in flight when everything's trimmed out and perfect. It just started missing. And it turned out to be the ignition harness. Had a lot of time on it and wasn't providing a good spark. So twice now that happened to me where it was an ignition issue, and I really didn't suspect that. It took a lot of replacing things before I finally found that problem.
Yeah, I don't know how they actually tested the spark plugs. So that's definitely one thing. And then, like you said, my fiance has almost identical plane, and she had an issue very, very similar, and it turned out to be the wire harness. So that's what I went to, but they tried another one.
They tried another harness, really?
Yeah, and different magnetos.
And different mags.
Yeah, that's right. I see that now on your list. Wow. Well, they've done a lot of troubleshooting. I mean, I would ask them about the spark plugs, just because when you said they seem to make a good spark, that's kind of tracked back to my experience to get some data on that. I mean, maybe they did put it in a plug tester, in which case I can't doubt that.
And
was it just low RPM, or even on the higher RPM?
it's happening in cruise, right?
You said it happened during climb.
Yeah, and takeoff.
Yep. Yeah, and it, like in the beginning of that video, it just fully dropped out momentarily.
And you have no engine monitor, so we can't say it's a sticking valve or anything.
Yeah, I've been biting my tongue. I wasn't going to do the engine monitor thing because this is a Taylor craft after all.
Yeah, I understand.
How long has it been since the engine was either overhauled or case split?
I don't know the exact date, but it's been a while. But they pulled. I know you guys love this. They pulled all the cylinders and inspected them all, and didn't find any smoking gun there.
Wow. They pulled the cylinders to inspect them instead of a borescope. Interesting.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Wow. Boy, and you don't have hydraulic lifters. Let's see.
Fuel, air, spark.
Yeah. That's you go to the very basics.
Yeah.
And spark doesn't seem logical, although it can happen if you have a whole set of bad plugs. But typically in order for it to be plugs, we're talking an intermittent problem. So like Colleen, your situation, yours was not intermittent. They were failing on your flight to land.
Well, it was like a hesitation, throw you into the straps, and then, so it was kind of like what he's experiencing, and it was at different RPMs and different flight regimes.
Yeah.
But it was fine until it wasn't fine, which really was disturbing,
Different carburetors. So I'm thinking a sudden air leak somewhere in the induction system, but all that's been off and back on. I assume they're putting new gaskets on when they put on these different carburetors.
The other thing that I've seen, and I don't know, his aircraft is probably completely different. Does he have any sort of alternate air thing where it could be blocking the air intake and then not blocking it? We have that in the Cardinal. It's a hinge door that breaks off and completely obstructs the intake into the servo, and then the engine starts to die and it pops back out.
I had that on my twin Comanche.
But I'm not sure what the C85 has for alternate air, if anything, right?
No, I mean, just
it has to have carb heat.
Yeah.
Carb heat.
Yeah.
But you check to make sure that valve isn't moving. I mean, I know you've had it all apart, but we have to ask some of the obvious questions.
Definitely. I haven't put my eyes on that, but I assume with putting two different carbs, 3 total, that would have been inspected.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I think at this point, with all the things that have been done, assuming that other things were checked, I would go say, well, okay, maybe we assume, but maybe during certain operations that valve is moving, and it's covering the inlet to the carburetor. And then when the engine starts to die, that vacuum goes away and that piece falls out of position.
You talking about the carburetor heat door?
the carburetor heat door or the box or something associated with it. I'm not real familiar with what this looks like on the Taylorcraft. But I experienced something incredibly similar, completely different design, but the alternate air door on my twin Comanche, the hinge failed. And so the door inside the induction made its way to cover the air inlet to the throttle body.
Exactly.
And that just interrupted everything. The engine kept running, which is odd. But as I throttled back, apparently repositioned and it was changing. This all happened on one particular flight. And when I landed, started looking around. Sure enough, I find the air door. Now, if I'd changed the throttle body, this would have shown up. But I'm just saying there may be failure modes that can allow something to cover it up. I and Jess suggested a shop rag earlier, but this would be the equivalent of a shop rag.
You know, I don't know the T-Craft and the C85. I don't even think it has any mufflers or anything like that. But a loose baffle and a muffler could also cause
flame cone.
Could also cause intermittent power loss. And
that's really good.
Does it? I don't think it has an exhaust like that though.
Does it have
I don't think it.
Straight
no,
up.
I know on my Super Cub the flame guard is an issue, but I don't think it is on the Taylorcraft.
I don't think so.
What do you think? It just has straight pipes and no muffler?
I think so.
No, I'm actually sure it does. Just straight.
Yeah, sounded like straight.
What about? Is there any possibility that it's a cylinder valve issue? A valve hanging up somehow?
Well, they had all the cylinders off.
Yeah, and they put new guards in.
One valve wouldn't shut it totally down, would it? I mean, it was like
on a little 4-cylinder engine, it might.
Yeah, it could. Yeah.
They said they had all cylinders off and checked them for valve clearance and checked the guides. So, but the airbox is a good thing to check. I know on my Super Cub, that's one thing my mechanic always tells me to look closely at because they are a failure point. And on the C85, the airbox is very similar. So, good thing to look into.
We'll call that a win.
Any ideas are helpful.
I mean, you could probably ground run the thing with the airbox removed.
I would definitely do that.
If it runs smoothly, you know it's somewhere in the airbox.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
I mean, you run the risk of unfiltered air in the carburetor, but
you're not going to do this for very long.
Not much. Yeah, you're not going to do it very long. And
but I would suggest. I would suggest getting bigger chocks first.
Yeah. Or just tie a rope to the tail.
I think the tail was tied down that video.
Okay, yeah, well, I hope so because those chocks weren't gonna restrain that airplane.
Right.
Well, with the tail on the ground, the engine's higher, so the risk of sucking up trash and stuff.
That's right. That's why they do it
that way. Why they do it that way.
Yeah, and at this point, all it's going to be is just snow and ice. So,
I think with those tires, the engine is up there.
Oh, that's true.
Halfway to the flight levels.
Yeah, that's
Brendan, we're all just jealous. We all wish we could be flying in Alaska.
Yeah, that would be fun. I don't want to live there, but I would love to fly there a little bit.
Well, let me know when you guys come up, and thanks for the ideas. Anything is helpful at this point. The mechanic said this has just kept him up at night, for months now, and we're just kind of out of ideas. But those are all helpful, and if anything else comes up, let me know.
All right.
I flew my 310 up to Alaska in 1990. Spent a month up there. It was like the best vacation I've ever had. It was just absolutely phenomenal.
Awesome.
It's different.
Yeah.
Very.
I every time I went in to talk to anybody, every time I went into flight service for a briefing, that was back in the days you could get an in-person briefing. Somewhere in the conversation, there always was some comment about, you must be from the lower 48. You're not from around here,
I can see that.
Yeah.
Somebody looked in the window of my 310, said, I don't see a radar altimeter. You're not from around here.
Or a rifle.
Or a rifle. Right. Yeah, a rifle.
Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Great question.
Yeah, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
All right.
Our next question is from James, who has first-time owner nerves. Go ahead, James.
Hi, good morning, guys. Well, pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me on the show. And Colleen, yes, absolutely right. This would be first airplane purchase for myself and potentially one or two other partners who are looking to get in on the aircraft as well.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
That is not the first time I've heard somebody say that.
But don't run away.
So we've been doing some pretty good research. And the kind of aircraft that we're looking at that fits our mission and price point in terms of performance and equipment is basically a Piper Arrow, or we've also been looking at some Moonies as well. So single engine piston kind of is the range that we're looking at here. And I kind of disappeared down the rabbit hole, as you kind of do when you're looking at aircraft purchases, looking at the difference between, in terms of maintenance, really, because everyone knows that potentially the purchase of the aircraft isn't the most expensive part of aircraft ownership.
Right.
So I went down the rabbit hole and looking at the differences between retractable gear, fixed gear, turbo, naturally aspirated. So I was just looking to get some information from you folks. Obviously, you've seen a lot of both of these types of aircraft come and go in your experience. And I was just looking to get some information on the potential difference in cost of maintaining and operating fixed gear versus retractable, turbo versus non-turbo, 6-cylinder versus 4-cylinder.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is going to be a long conversation
It could
with
be.
a
We
lot
need
of a lot of quibbling.
Oh, well, I mean, my first airplane was a retractable. And after 2 years of pain, everything was fine. I don't have a problem with, no, but it took 2 years to kind of figure out issues with that. But I've enjoyed the retractable, and it was a 4-cylinder, and I own a 6-cylinder now, and I really like only having to clean 4 sets of plugs, not 6. That extra 2 cylinders is a lot more. So I think it's very economical to fly a 4-cylinder aircraft, and I would recommend it.
Okay. Thank you.
That's my input. And the constant speed question, no brainer. I think that constant speed prop has been very low maintenance, little, and I think it adds a lot to your comfort in the cabin and your performance.
Yeah, I think
agree with
that is
that.
kind of a non-factor from what I can see at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you, Paul and Mike.
Insurance.
Oh, well, that's
yes,
true.
absolutely. That's a big one.
I should have said that. Yeah, we took a big hit on insurance as student pilots initially with a retractable.
Right. Even experienced pilots, retractable.
Yeah,
is the deal.
that's true. It's about a
And-
50% bump in insurance, I would say.
Can be. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, gear up
doesn't-
landings represent a very large
Oh, yeah.
percentage of insurance claims.
yeah. I would just throw out as a possibility, you're looking at Pipers, sounds like you're going towards the low wing, but just fine.
Yeah, we're all low wing guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, Colleen.
That's okay.
And Paul.
Yeah, I'm heading to Tulsa
Paul
this
is
weekend to teach the
Amber
180.
Wingsters.
Yeah, Amber, yeah.
Amber.
If you're looking at the retractable Arrow, compare it to the Dakota or the Cherokee 235.
Mhm.
You may be surprised at the minimal difference in performance, and it's the exact same airframe from the firewall aft.
Of course, the Dakota's got a lot more horsepower.
It has the 235 horse Lycoming, which is a phenomenal engine, even though it has 2 extra cylinders. But the turbo that you're looking at, the Arrow, is a 6-cylinder. It's the Continental IO 360.
Yeah.
You can back off.
The normally aspirated Pipers are typically 4-cylinder likes.
Yep. Yeah.
The turbocharged ones are 6-cylinder Continentals, because for some reason, Lycoming never made a 4-cylinder
Right.
turbocharged.
That was a
engine.
follow-up question I had
Right.
also.
Yeah.
What was the logic? What was the
Don't
logic
know.
I
there?
don't think there's any
It's a
logic.
Business decision. I think.
Continental has always been the leader in turbocharging.
Hmm.
And Lycoming, the only engines that Lycoming turbochargers are the 540 and I guess now the 580.
Except for
Um,
aftermarket. You can aftermarket turbo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the TR 182 has a.
But that's a 6-cylinder.
It is a 6-cylinder. It's a carbureted Lycoming 540 that Cessna put a blower in front of the carburetor, which is
Mhm.
Yeah.
probably not the finest hour of Cessna engineering, but
So in terms of maintenance expense for, say, a turbo versus a naturally aspirated, do you see significantly more unscheduled maintenance items related to people not necessarily knowing how to operate correctly? Because none of the guys in our group have turbo time. So
there is some scheduled maintenance increase on turbocharging, because typically the turbochargers don't make it through the life of the engine. You can usually figure having to change a turbocharger once during the engine's life.
okay,
1,500 hours on a turbocharger is probably about as much as you're likely to get. They're not all that expensive as airplane parts go, and it's usually not a horrible job to change them, but you do need to expect to change them. You do need to expect a little bit more exhaust system maintenance on turbocharged airplanes.
okay.
But the big thing is that, you know, turbocharged engines is a lot easier to abuse. If you have a ham-handed pilot, it's best not to put a blower at his disposal.
Oh, interesting.
And to compound that, the turbocharged PA-28s that you're looking at, you use Continental 360 engines, and the 360 engine, it's not a bad engine, but it's like, of all of the engines that we've been talking about, it's the least robust. Basically, in developing the 360, Continental took the big bore design, the 475, 25, 50 design, and kind of made a lightweight version of it. And it is less tolerant of abuse than the big bore Continentals are. And so you need to treat those engines with care. You need to be pretty obsessive about temperature control. And some of them are worse than others. The harder you blow that engine, the more likely it is to go through cylinders.
I love that.
We're going to leave that one alone.
The pressurized Skymaster, I think, is the worst. They've got a 360 engine that's rated at 225 horsepower, which is way more than that engine really ought to be producing, and it goes through cylinders a lot. Plus, the Skymaster has some unique engine cooling problems to begin with. The turbocharged engine in the Arrow, I think, is only rated at 200. I think.
Yep, 200, and it really works hard to get it.
So it's not one of the really bad cases. Also, fortunately, Piper didn't go for this fixed wastegate thing that you see like in Mooney 231s and so on, which was like
they did on the Seneca.
Oh, they did on the Seneca. That's right.
Oh,
That wasn't a good idea.
No,
Can you upgrade those to kind of a Merlin wastegate?
Merlin, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, the ones with a fixed wastegate can be retrofitted with a Merlin system, which is a little bit weird. It's a pneumatically controlled automatic wastegate, but that's not an issue for the airplanes you're looking at. So I wouldn't be scared of the Turbo Arrow.
Okay.
But if you do buy one, you need to have an engine monitor for sure.
Yeah.
And you need to educate all people who fly it to be very, very obsessive about keeping cylinder head temperatures under control.
Some standardized training.
Very good. Well, thank you guys. I think you answered my question very thoroughly. I appreciate your time. And Colleen, I'm actually just up the coast from you. I'm at John Wayne. So anytime you're up this way, be happy to meet up.
Lunch. Let's go find that.
I used to be based there back in the day.
Oh, fantastic.
Back before it was called John Wayne. It was called Orange County Airport.
Yeah, it's been a great place. I've been doing all my training out of here, so it's been a good experience so far.
Oh,
Cool.
James, it sounds like you need to make a spreadsheet. If you don't have one already.
I'm an engineer. I love spreadsheets. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I know.
right up my alley.
This
Yeah,
is permission to do that, and it's not even geeky.
Yeah. That's what I would do. Okay, well, great question. I know at least I have a friend's looking for an airplane right now. She's in the same boat. She's been comparing models, and that's what you got to do. You got to just rack and stack everything to feel comfortable with the decision when you actually pull the trigger.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, guys. Love the show. Thank you for everything you do. Much
Yeah.
appreciated.
Good to have you on, James.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, so a letter for this episode. This is from John. He says, "Hi, I just listened to your September 15th show. I think you might have downplayed the Lycoming wobble test a bit. There was a lot of emphasis that reaming was the major component. I disagree. Both aspects of the test, the min and the max, are important. The min clearance will declare itself without usually creating a major situation, i.e. a stuck valve. However, the max clearance is just as, or perhaps more important, because on the Lycoming with the sodium-filled valves, as the guide wear increases, the valve face contacts the seat at different angles. This stresses the stem neck and can break the valve off the stem and send it into the piston. The loose parts migrate out of the intake and travel to other cylinders and cause further damage. Not having that one cylinder offline isn't enough. He says, least that's what's happened to me at 1,700 hours on my 0320. I've seen it on a few other airplanes. They all have been Grumman 0320 or 0360s. That's also what I work on."
See, I think he was reacting to, I think what Paul said is, I don't even bother doing the wobble test. I just ream, because Paul says
Yeah, that's what he said.
invariably it's just quicker to do it that way. But he's warning it might be too loose.
Well, it can. So the wobble test, you get all the tooling set up and you check in round numbers, 15 thousandths to 30 thousandths movement on the valve stem at a specific distance from the top of the valve guide. And every engine's a little bit different, so there's specs involved. What we found in the airplanes that we worked on, which were the 540s, and the engines that I see here, I have yet to see one that's loose. Every one that I've dealt with, it was tight. Take the rocker arm off, and I mean, some of them you couldn't even move.
Yeah.
So we didn't, with those, we wouldn't bother doing the test because we knew they were too tight.
I think the way it goes is that when you ream it, if the reamer wobbles, then you worry.
That's good.
But I mean, it's true. They have the limits for a reason. They came out with a new type of guide material. So the bell mouthing of the guide, which makes it wobble, is less likely. But so they went from 400-hour recurring check to 1,000-hour recurring check. But in all my time, I never had one that bell mouth, which is why I made the comment that I did about I just ream it.
Okay.
But if he's experiencing some that are loose, I mean, you would know it right off the bat. As soon as you take the springs off, grab a hold of that valve, it's like, holy smokes, this feels not tight. Then yeah, maybe do that test.
Our next question is from Will, who's wondering if he has a lemon. That sounds so sad.
Oh yeah, it does.
Go ahead, Will.
Hello to all three of you. Thank you so much for taking my question. I just found metal in my oil filter during a routine oil change, and so I pulled out my borescope and popped the cap off the oil filler neck, and saw that I had a pitted lifter, and it was destroyed around the side. The engine was overhauled in 2019 and has 209 hours on it. It's in a 1975 Cessna 180 with the P-Ponk 0470-50. And I've always run cam guard in it. It's been hangared since it's been overhauled. And I make sure to fly it to get the oil temp up to 180, run it for about a half an hour at least at that temperature. And I've had a dehydrator on it last winter when I was having some work done on it where it sat the most. It sat for 6 months last winter. What's so frustrating about this is that the reason I had to overhaul the engine was I found a metal in my filter and had a rusty cam. And when I purchased the airplane in November of 2017, I flew it weekly for 120 hours until I found the metal in the filter in December of 2018. And elected to have it overhauled for various reasons. But anyway, back to my current situation. When we found the lifter had been spalled, we followed, my mechanic followed the service directive 05-1 Bravo, and we removed all the lifters and found that the number 5 lifter had been spalled, and he used a pick and inspected the lobe, cam lobe face, and it appeared to be okay. So we put a new lifter in and I flew it, and found more metal, and looked back down the filler neck and found that it, in fact, was not okay, and had again spalled that lifter. So I've removed the engine, and it's off the airplane for repair at this time. I record all my flights. Yeah, I recorded all my flights. I went back in the logs, and I noticed that I'd had two 2-month periods of inactivity, 1 3-month. And then, like I mentioned last winter, it sat for 6 months with getting some major work done on it. After the 3-month period, which was the winter previous, I noticed that my oil sample, the iron in my oil sample increased from 29 parts per million to 44. I feel as though I'm getting a double master's degree in aircraft ownership and possibly flunking, and I'm wondering if you can give me some insight into what I'm doing. And it seems as though these engines are really fragile, but whatever I did wrong, I'd like to figure out so that I don't do it again.
I have.
Well, the 0470 is certainly not a fragile engine. It's one of the most robust engines ever built. You've got a P-pump conversion on it that puts 550 cylinders or 520 cylinders on it, but that doesn't make it non-robust. And let me understand. You found a pitted lifter. You pulled the lifter, inspected the cam, through the vacant lifter bore.
That's correct. We pulled all of the lifters out. Yep.
And the cam lobes seemed okay. And then you put in new lifters, and the same lifter position is the one that came apart.
Yes, correct. And it did it in about a 2-hour flight.
Oh, that's not.
Doesn't seem
that
right.
That can't happen. That has to be a bad lifter. You can't. Even if the cam was all messed up, a lifter wouldn't come apart in 2 hours.
Really?
How did you determine that it came apart in a 2-hour flight?
I looked back down the filler neck, and we could visually see. I believe I maybe sent you photos of what the one that I found looked like. Well,
you went down the filler neck with a bore scope, in other words.
Correct. Yep. And
so you should be
the whole edge of it was.
Right.
Yeah, the whole edge of it was eaten up.
Say that again.
The whole edge of the lifter that we put back in the engine had been chipped off. I chipped is the best way I can describe it. It chipped that lifter all the way around. I sent you, I believe, I don't know if you got them, but I sent you pictures of the first one.
We have pictures. It's pretty bad.
And that was a new lifter with only 2 hours on it.
That's the old one per se. The new one looks exactly the same. Yes. And I don't know if you can look. I don't know if in the photo we had a hard time determining. My mechanic and I both looked at the cam lobe, but it appeared to me that it was possible that there was a very small piece of the lobe itself missing. But we couldn't really determine that, and he used a pick and didn't feel like there was any variation there. But that was the only thing that that we could determine. And other than it's at the shop right now. I'm not sure if they've taken it apart, but I don't know. Other than assuming it was the cam, that's kind of why I emailed all of you.
I'm terribly suspicious of this because I've never heard of a lifter coming apart in 2 hours.
That short a time.
I just don't think that happens.
Even if something was wrong with the cam, that's a very short time.
Yeah.
Really?
So
Okay.
that points to something wrong with the lifters that they put in, some kind of metallurgical.
Were these lifters that were from Continental or from Superior?
I believe Continental. They're brand new.
There were new Continental lifters, because I know, Continentals had several
Right.
runs of defective lifters that weren't hardened correctly, some of which they've fessed up to, some of which they haven't. That service bulletin that you referred to, 05-1, was actually issued as a result of a bunch of bad lifters that got out into the field. And one of the humorous things in that service bulletin, I mean, some of the stuff in that service bulletin is very good. The stuff about determining cam condition is excellent. And we refer to that service bulletin all the time. But one of the more humorous parts of that service bulletin is Continental is saying that spalling of the lifter up to 10% of its surface is acceptable, and that lifters are somehow self-healing, and both of those are like total lies. That some lawyer put in there to minimize their warranty exposure or something. Sorry, Continental. But but lifters don't come apart in 2 hours. You need a grinding wheel to make a lifter come apart in 2 hours.
Are you
Cam is not going to do that.
Are you suggesting he should go back to Continental and push them on this?
Well, I wasn't suggesting that. I was just
try lifters from Superior,
thinking that it's a shame that engine's out of the airplane, and
right.
I would hate to see the case split if there wasn't a good reason to do that. And
I would too.
You have the ability to look at it very carefully with a borescope, because it's a sand cast engine with a big hole in the top of it to stick a borescope through. So
I'd put another lifter in it and try again, because that sounds way more like something fishy about the lifter. Can't put my finger on it, but that isn't right.
Yeah. Oh,
that is chipped. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about
and
the edge.
Do you notice the lobe? You can see like streaking signatures that
that looks
lobe
normal.
Itself.
Yeah, that's just
looks normal.
Yeah. The main interesting part of the cam lobe is always going to be the apex.
Yeah, I mean the edge of the lifter that we're looking at there, that seems to like be chamfered or whatever you want to call it. That cam doesn't do that. Cam doesn't touch the edge of the lifter.
Not in that way, for sure.
There's something else going on there. It doesn't have anything to do with the cam.
There is a picture that he sent that's the lifter face that's really bad. That one.
Yeah.
Look at that. I mean,
that's classic spalling.
That's classic.
But that didn't happen in
no,
2
not 2
hours.
hours. That was the first time, I guess. Or
that was the first lifter.
So did the second one look like that?
Yeah.
We never pulled it out. We just he made the assumption the cam was bad. And
I don't think that's a good assumption.
No, that's a bad assumption.
Okay.
Yeah. I would have pulled the lifter and looked at the cam.
Well, you can still do that. I mean, the engine hasn't been sent off yet, right?
Oh,
it's at their shop, but I'm not sure that they've taken it apart yet. They're just down the road from where I'm at.
As soon as the podcast is over, I would call them and say, if you haven't split it, please don't. And let's pull some lifters again and get a really good look.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that thing that you were seeing on the edge of the lifter, that's just not something a cam does. The cam doesn't make contact with that edge.
Not in a way to bust it off.
Huh. I don't know if this is of useful information, but it may be. We did the 500-hour magneto inspection this winter and found that part of a tooth one of those gears was missing, and he pulled the gear out and put a new one back in.
You
That's
talking about the
plastic, right?
plastic?
One of the
It's plastic.
accessory drive gears,
Yeah.
The
or
accessory
the
drive
gears
gear,
Are you
yeah.
talking about gears inside the mag?
The gears inside the case, I would guess. I'm not.
Oh.
Oh, yeah, the
Oh.
That was the
accessory
first
drive
time I've
gear.
taken mags up. Yep.
Oh,
Wow.
that
Hmm.
hurts. So that means
That's
the
a pretty
accessory-
beefy gear too.
Yeah.
Yeah. How does
That
that
suggests
happen?
that
Is that a kickback?
It suggests that some
Oh.
piece of metal got in between the gears.
Yeah.
Wow.
You can't.
That's
break
way
it.
So
more
I just-
worrisome than this lobe.
Yeah.
That worries me
Is
a
it-
whole lot
is
more
it
than
now?
this lifter. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big piece of
Huh.
metal.
Yeah. Because where did it go?
I
It
would-
falls down into
Check your oil
important
pickup.
other gears.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
wherever it went, it probably wound up in the oil pan. It's probably not doing any mischief down there.
Not at this point, but man.
I
So-
don't worry about
and
metal down in the pan. I don't like shop rags down there.
Right.
But it's amazing the stuff you can find in an oil pan when you overhaul an engine that's been sitting there for years and hasn't caused any
Hasn't
trouble.
done anything.
But yeah, that lifter, that's pretty weird. That's not the cams doing. Cams don't do that.
Interesting.
I don't know what it's got that lifter chip, but boy, it
I think
sure
you
looks
should
to
And then
me
why
like it
another
might have
one
been
would
a-
do it
Might have
in-
been a bad lifter.
But then, so how would you get two bad lifters in a row? I mean, being with the
Well,
odds of that
again, you
happening
haven't
seem-
pulled that lifter, so we don't get
You
to
don't
take a
know.
good look at it. It would
Oh.
be nice to take a good look at it and see what it looks like.
And once you have the
Okay.
lifter out again, let's make a way more investigative look at the cam loads.
Yeah, if the cam
Up
lobe
close and personal.
if the cam lobe was bad, and bad means it's got a crack in it,
Yeah.
then that crack would be grinding away at the surface
Yeah.
of the lifter, but not at the edge of it.
And if it had some sort of weird imperfection that may chip away at the edge, that would be the thing you should be able to see. Get in
That
there.
would have to look like the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. Or something that
Really?
instead of a pit is a rise, something that extends up, which I've never seen that, but
Yeah, the other thing to understand about these cams, the cam is case hardened. It's carburized, so it has a very thin outer hard wear layer, about 15 thousandths of an inch thick. And as long as that outer layer is intact, the cam will last a very, very long time. If that 15 thousandths of an inch thick hardened layer gets breached somehow, either by a crack or by some kind of a deep corrosion pit, it would have to be a pretty deep one. And so the softer inner meat of the cam, if you will, is exposed. Then it starts to wear at a very highly accelerated rate, and that's typically what winds up tearing lifters apart. But if that were the case, the cam would be very obviously bad. I mean, it would be. You'd look at it and you'd say, "Oh my God!" You wouldn't have any question that the cam would have to go away. If the cam looks okay, if the cam passes the fingernail test, never mind the sharp pick, it's not going to be tearing up a lifter, and it's certainly not going to be tearing up a lifter in 2 hours. Something fishy about this.
The reason I asked the lemon question was that, when I overhauled the engine, I'd flown it weekly and flew it all the time, and then had the same issue happen, and it was corrosion. And when we pulled the engine apart, it was definitely corroded. So I don't understand. When I purchased the airplane, though, the previous owner had not flown it very much. And so I've heard you say, Mike, that it can take upwards of 150 hours when you've started flying an engine again all the time, to see if your cam survived. And it definitely had cracks in it. I have it downstairs in my basement, and that had very obvious
This is the
things
old
wrong
cam.
with it.
Yeah, the old one.
The
Yeah.
old cam, yep. Now I have two might have two cams now, who knows.
Well,
The-
but
would
now you have the advantage of looking of knowing what a bad cam looks like. So if your
Right.
current cam doesn't look like that, it's not tearing up lifters, okay? And it
which is
doesn't
what
appear
we thought.
that's the case. So there's probably might have been something wrong with that lifter you put in.
Yeah. It's
Just
such
as a-
bad
Just
luck.
between
Yeah.
you, me, and the wall. I generally get lifters from Superior.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Continental.
And it might have been, I might have
too many-
misspoken. I just don't
It's
Right.
remember.
had too many cases of shipping defective lifters in the past for my taste.
So just another little thought, while the engine is presumably off and it's easy to get to, because you said that about the tooth coming off the one gear, you can drop
That's
that
my next
oil
question.
pan and see what's in it and clean it out. It's easy to do when it's not on the airplane.
Right.
It's a gasket and a whole bunch of bolts.
And that's not an overhaul.
It's not an
splitting the
overhaul.
case.
Oh my
Yeah.
God!
No.
With
And then
with the pan off of a
you can
of a
see
470, you got the cam just
right
sitting out
there.
there in front of God and everybody. Yeah,
Oh,
Yep.
that's a great
you
idea.
can see
Right.
the entire cam.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do that.
Okay.
That's-
Yep.
Yeah.
So 2 birds with 1 stone. You find out what, if anything, is laying in the bottom of the oil pan, like a tooth.
A couple
Or your
of
wrench.
teeth.
My wrench.
My
Yeah,
wrench. There's
right. It's-
there it is with
As
your
long as
name
it's-
etched on
as
it.
long as it's not a 6-cell mag light.
That's right. With Paul written on it. Yeah, and have a really good look at that cam, and you can rotate it around and see all the lobes up close and personal.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Since the engine is unfortunately off, you might as well take advantage of that.
Yeah, but don't split the case halves yet.
Yeah.
That's
I
the-
won't. I'm gonna definitely. I totally espouse your guys' views on not splitting cases if at all possible. And I felt like I was trying to do everything right, and I was mortified that I lost the engine.
Is the engine
presumably lost it.
shop reasonably nearby? Can you go down there
Yes,
with
it's
your
just
own,
up the road.
with your own personal fingernail and go over the
My mechanic is a very great teacher. He allows me to, I do my annuals with him, and he started an engine shop and sold it to his son-in-law, and they do the engines, and they're very much on the,
Huh.
if it can just be repaired or,
Yeah,
very, very reasonable fixes. And so they would totally before me coming over there. In fact, when I pulled it off the last time, he let me take it apart in his shop, and I learned all kinds
cool.
of stuff. So
Oh, that's great.
well,
That's
the
great.
very fact that he said, let's pull a lifter and look at the cam, and we
Mhm.
can just put another lifter in it and go fly it.
That's
good for
that
him.
speaks volumes. Yep.
Yeah.
Good for him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Just,
The just when we saw the results of the second one, we just made, I guess, a quick assumption that something was terribly wrong. So
I can understand that.
But I mean, just to pick up on what you were saying before, that engine that you have is the antithesis of being fragile. It is the bottom end is hell for stout.
It's
that's
not
what
a
I
lemon.
thought.
Not
Yeah.
a lemon.
That's
It's
what I
not a
thought,
lemon.
but
Mm.
that's good. Okay, great. I just it had happened to the previous owner, and now it's happened to me twice. So I guess the bottom line is fly it every week, but the problem is I live in Alaska and it got snowed in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. We can understand that.
Well, pickle it. Our next question is from Tim, who's doing some smart planning ahead, which that seems weird for this group, but let us know what you're doing.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on today. So I'm in the middle of an RV14A build, and
Cool.
and recently ordered an engine, which is a long wait time and a frankly, even for a home builder, really scary amount of money.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
looking ahead at what's going to happen is I anticipate that engine's going to get to me some number of months or heaven forbid years before I'm really ready for it.
Hmm.
And then the other piece of it is I also anticipate that I'm going to hang it, and it's going to
Right.
be several months worth of work before I'm ready to run the thing. So fear is that I do something silly and let corrosion or some other act of negligence impact the longevity of this really expensive, noisy thing on the front of the airplane.
So much to talk about. There is a procedure, and I see this with, well, I know Continental does, was when Cirrus has airplanes that have to wait. Every so many months, they take things apart and look at things and lubricate things, and they'll state in the engine logbook that they perform this procedure per Continental's guidance. I don't know that Lycoming has something specific for that, but there is a shelf life when the engine is in a crate. So my first thought would be find out what Continental says do, because that's your real concern is about warranty.
Right. So Lycoming has a publication that is publication 1481 Bravo that deals with exactly this. And I believe the engine will come to me with 180 days worth of preservation.
Mhm.
And that comes sealed in a plastic bag with a moisture indicating
Desiccant plug.
Yep.
Something in there that will turn from, I think it's from blue to pink.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
And so
Yeah,
I
desiccant.
have great hope that will serve me well while it's sitting in the crate. But I guess the question becomes, do you have thoughts on, I really two things, or hear about two things. One is either quote unquote pickling the engine, or otherwise I also see other home builders that are using sometimes commercial, sometimes homemade desiccant systems that blow air across a desiccant and then into the engine. Do you guys have thoughts about that?
Well, the engine's already pickled.
Yeah.
It's coming from the factory pickled. So, and again, for warranty reasons, maintain whatever factory pickling. So I have to tell you just a real short possible here. We have two airplanes that we used to maintain back when we did other airplanes than what we do now. They're local airplanes owned by the same husband and wife. She owned this Commander 114B, and he had his Navajo. They both flew each other's airplanes. And for medical reasons, the airplanes both sat for 8 years. I'm sorry, 8 years
Ooh.
next to each other in the same hangar.
Mhm.
Both have Lycoming 540 engines, different version of them, but 540 engines. We did the return it to service annual for the Commander about 3 months ago. We just knew the engine was going to be a rust bucket. Rolled it in, inspected the cylinders, the borescope. They were clean as a whistle. We took the oil filler port off the top of the engine, which you won't be able to do on the engine that you're getting. And we looked down at the camshaft. We could see the entire camshaft and all the lifters absolutely pristine. They looked exactly like the day that the engine last ran.
Oh.
Then we got to the Navajo. We did the same inspection on the Navajo. The entire cylinder walls on all 12 cylinders and the camshaft and all the lobes have a beautiful patina of rust. And they sat next to each other in the same hangar. I don't know the difference, but yeah, your fears are well-founded.
If you could figure out the difference and put it in a bottle, we could all be millionaires.
It'd be great. Absolutely.
Anyway, the pickling that the manufacturer does will not last forever. If we're talking about the engine sitting around for years, you're probably going to have to do some intervention. You can partially pickle it, but you can't fully pickle it because you can replace the desiccant spark plugs and stuff like that, but you can't really recoat the inside of the engine with pickling oil because you can't run the engine. It's
Right.
you can't turn it. You're not going to be able to get lubricant around there. So I think your best bet is to probably regularly change the desiccant spark plugs to keep the cylinders dry, and to use some kind of a dehumidifier to keep the bottom end of the engine dry. There are two styles of dehumidifier. One uses desiccant crystals that have to be periodically refreshed.
Mm-hmm.
And the other there's a unit called a Black Max. It costs about $500, and it's an electric dehumidifier that basically works the way a room dehumidifier does by refrigerating the air and squeezing all the moisture out that way. And it doesn't have any consumables other than electrons. You just have to plug it into the wall, and it pumps out dry air, and then you hook a tube into the engine breather or the engine oil filler port, and it keeps the bottom end of the engine full of this cold, dry air that will protect it. That's probably about the best you're going to be able to do.
Okay.
Yeah. And it always goes longer than you expect, right? You always think, oh, it's just a couple more months, and then 6 months later.
This is an epidemic problem with home builders, because they typically get their engines long before they're ready to put them in service.
Sure.
And it's even worse now because of the extreme long lead times. People are ordering their engines super early because they know they're going to take forever to come.
Don't blame you.
And then they come and they're not ready, and that's just the way it goes with
a year or so ago.
airplanes.
There was news leaked of a impending price increase from Lycoming, and that triggered a whole bunch of engine orders, including my own.
Wow.
Yeah,
Smart advertising.
I think that's why they did the price increase. And they never just increase it and not tell anybody. They always telegraph this in advance because they're just trying to drive more orders.
Yeah. And somehow that 1 year build turns into 5.
Yeah. So I think buying a machine like a Black Max or something like that sounds like your best bet.
I appreciate it. Yet more money to spend on my home build.
I know.
That's right. Always.
When you're talking about a $45,000 engine, a $500 dehumidifier just seems like it's worth it.
It all hurts.
I wish it was only 45,000, Mike. And please, guys, don't call my wife and tell her about this.
No.
Wow.
We'll make sure that she doesn't listen to the podcast.
She's going to love the airplane. Just
she
tell
will.
her that.
She will love the airplane.
And all the great places you'll go. And remember,
if she survives long enough.
Remember, you're already 90% complete and only
shush.
90% to go.
Enjoy the build. Enjoy it.
I am enjoying the build. I greatly appreciate your time today, guys.
Oh, and log all your time. It counts towards your A&P.
There you go. That's right.
There we go.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have fun with that.
Thank you, guys.
Right.
Enjoy.
Thanks
Tim.
Bye-bye. Okay, we're wrapping up another podcast. We'd love to know if we got anything right or how much Paul got wrong. Please send your questions and comments to podcasts@aopa.org, and we'd love to hear from you next time.
I'm not even sure I'm going to respond to that. I'm not sure what to do with that.
You have to respond, Paul.
I have to respond. Just think how boring it would be without me giving all this bad advice and wrong answers. I do it on purpose. I know all the right answers, of course.
You do it to counterbalance Colleen, who never says anything wrong.
That would be probably true.
Probably true.
Oh, see ya.
Bye-bye, everybody.